I hope you're sitting down for this one. We're going to talk about the middle class. This looks like a lot longer segment than it is, but it is particularly important to understanding the Renaissance and the art world as a whole. So, for wealthy merchant bankers who were middle-class families, artistic patronage was a means of achieving and maintaining social status and political power in a society where there was a strict social hierarchy. And before jumping too much further in, let's define our terms. When we look at the class system, we're really looking at 5 classes. And the upper 2 are it depends on the society, whether there's an aristocracy or not. So when we talk about the poor, we're talking about people who cannot meet their needs, i.e. food, shelter, and security. When we talk about the working class, these are people who can meet their needs, but they don't have the ability to save. So they're living hand to mouth. That check that they make on Friday lasts just long enough to get to the next one. They're not starving, but they're not going to be passing on anything to their children, which becomes a key element here. The middle class meets their needs with extra income sufficient to leave an inheritance. Now, the middle class could leave a small inheritance or a big inheritance. The key here is that they are making their own money. By this definition, Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett, and Elon Musk would all be middle class because they made their money. Whereas someone who's born to a wealthy parent who gets an inheritance from them and then becomes wealthier wouldn't actually count. So the middle class are people who make their own money. It doesn't matter how much they make, they just have to make it themselves and leave money for others. This is typically in Renaissance Italy going to be merchants, bankers, traders. It's going to be some skilled craftsmen on the lower level, and you can even break up the middle class into the upper middle class and the lower middle class, but we're not going to do that here. And then just to round it out, the upper class, by definition, inherited their wealth. So they got it from their parents or grandparents. The aristocracy is the same as the upper class with the addition of some form of inherited title. So now that we've defined the classes, let's focus on the middle class because they're going to be the most important as we move forward, at least in the structures of this class. In Florence, the economic prosperity of the city had enabled the merchant banker families, such as the Medici, to control the government. These newcomers were very eager to demonstrate that they belonged as a ruling class in a world of kings, princes, and popes. In addition, we see a book that comes out, the Book of Courtiers, which stresses the importance, which stresses the importance of the cultured noble who appreciated the finer things in life, like music, art, sculpture, and literature. Furthermore, civic humanism taught that the educated elite should involve themselves in public service, getting to those ideas from the last chapter. Also, let me remind you that usury, i.e. charging interest, a key element of banking, was actually a sin. And these are bankers. What they're doing is they're trying to commission art to clean their reputation through philanthropy. So they won't be thought of as bankers, but rather great philanthropists. By the way, we see the same thing today. For these reasons, during the Renaissance, the upper class became avid patrons of artists, sculptors, musicians, and intellectuals. Commissioning a piece of sculpture which would be put on public display would not only beautify the city, but also enhance the reputation of the patron. Besides using the arts to promote their own interests, it's fair to say that most patrons were genuine lovers of the arts. The Medici, for instance, spent huge sums of money commissioning paintings and sculptures for the privacy of their own palace in Florence. This trend was also present in Northern Europe, where the new monarchies, nobilities, and wealthy bankers and merchants also embraced patronage. Henry VIII, for example, will appoint the humanist Thomas More as his Lord Chancellor, and granted a generous stipend to Erasmus, Francis I of France was made even more magnificent by Leonardo da Vinci. During the Renaissance, therefore, a small, highly educated minority of literary humanists and artists created the culture of and for an exclusive elite. They cared little for the ordinary people. We don't see these artists creating pieces for your common poor or working class family. It just doesn't happen. So, what do we do about this? How do we start to look at it? Well, let's look at the Medici. By 1434, a single family had emerged dominant in the city of Florence. This is the Medici. How? Well, they make a loan. The Medici are a very small bank at the time. They're sort of a neighborhood bank dealing with a few blocks of Florence. They're not that powerful. But in one day comes a pirate who wanted to become Pope. And he says, "Arr, I wants me a loan. I wants to be Pope." And the Medici go, "Eh?" And then they go, "Okay, hey, what the heck? We have nothing to lose. This guy clearly is a pirate." So they give him a loan. It's kind of one of those speculative deals. Let's see what happens. Well, he becomes anti-Pope John the 23rd at Pisa. And one of the things he does during his papacy is he makes the Medici the bankers to God. Now, he's an anti-pope. There's a lot of politics that go into this. He has his own faction. But at the end of the day, the papacy accepts the Medici as bankers to God, meaning that they now collect the tithe from every church in Europe. And all of that money, 10% of everyone's income, passes through Florence. Cosimo de' Medici, as head of one of Europe's largest banks, amassed immense wealth and used it to control Florence. Even though he himself never held any formal office, he wielded influence through his clients who sat on the city council. These men were indebted to him for bank loans or other favors. Cosimo knew that as Florence was a republic, he didn't have the hereditary power of a monarch. Therefore, he used his wealth to win popularity with the people. How? Well, he's going to start commissioning numerous works of painting, sculpture, and architecture. Pieces that you've seen or will see throughout this class. For instance, he funded the construction of Europe's first public library in the monastery of San Marco. He commissioned Donatello's David, which introduced the idea of the classical nude, or really reintroduced the idea of the classical nude into Renaissance sculpture. He was the main supporter of Brunelleschi and his prestige soared when the dome on Florence's cathedral was completed. At his death, Cosimo was lauded as father of his country. His grandson, Lorenzo, who took over as head of the family in 1467, continued Medici patronage. He commissioned works by Leonardo, Botticelli, and Michelangelo. His patronage of artists and scholars earned him the title of Lorenzo the Magnificent. In 1471, he calculated that since 1434, his family had spent approximately 663,000 florins, or roughly $460 million in today's money, for charity, buildings, and taxes. He wrote, "I do not regret this, for though many would consider it better to have a part of that sum in their purse, I consider it to have been a great honor to our state, and I think the money was well expended, and I am well pleased." Now, why are they doing this? Again, they're trying to clean their family name. And what better way to do that than by creating works of philanthropy? And at the time, that's going to mean building new churches, commissioning new murals, new sculptures, And that creates competition amongst the artists. We have a lot of commissions floating around. We have a lot of artists, but to rise to the top, you really have to be exceptionally talented, which is why we see some of the amazing work that comes out of the 15th century. We also see that the middle class will be at the center of all of this, both in Italy, but also in Northern Europe, and not only during the Renaissance, but really moving forward. Because when you think about it, the poor can't afford these items. The upper classes don't need to show their wealth necessarily. They know they're wealthy. But the middle class constantly has to show status. And what better way of showing status than by commissioning art?